Bradley Ballard is a 39-year-old man who's been in and out of prison for a good part of his life. He spent 6 years behind bars after being arrested in 2004 for assaulting a receptionist and another employee of a New York law firm. Last June, he was arrested in Houston on public lewdness and assault charges for punching and exposing himself to a bus driver. And he was sent back to jail in New York for not telling his parole officer that he had left the city. So clearly, this is, these are incredibly deviant acts that he was engaged in. He was breaking the law. And if you're wondering how somebody gets to that point and how they could act like that, well, at least in this case, we have at least a partial answer, because it turns out he was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he's had schizophrenia for a very long time, which, needless to say, is one of the most extreme forms of mental illness. It's not, like, I know how a lot of people think that certain forms of mental illness are kind of like, there's a big gray area, like, oh, do you have depression, or are you just sad right now, or then do you have anxiety, like clinically diagnosed, or, are you just going through a rough patch, or whatever. People can debate other things, not schizophrenia. That's a hardcore mental illness, a big-time psychological disorder. So in his most recent stay at Rikers Island, he got in even more trouble because he made a lewd gesture at a female guard. So he was dragged off to solitary confinement, as a lot of people would be in that situation, and he was left alone. But here's where the situation takes a turn for the inexcusable. He wasn't given his medication. He was left in solitary for 7 days, and he proceeded to defecate all over the place and tie a rubber band around his genitals to the point that they were swollen and badly infected, and he eventually died naked on the floor. Now, I know a lot of people might think, well, whatever, man, he's a fucking criminal. Fuck him. But here's the problem. The problem is that when you have somebody who is clinically diagnosed with something like schizophrenia, the act of shitting all over your room and tying your genitals and pulling on it, that's not just like, oh, here he is acting up again, trying to get attention. That's like, whoa, he's going through a manic episode and his schizophrenia is flaring up. This is a medical thing that's going on right now. It's not just a behavioral thing where it's like, oh, here's another prisoner acting up. It's like the wiring is fucked up in your brain upstairs and it's not working properly, whatever the mechanism is that's going on, some synapse issues or neuron issues or whatever. I'm not a doctor, so I can't give you the details on it. But it's a medical issue, so when somebody's acting like that and they're a prisoner, you have to give them their medication. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. In fact, to begin with, when you put them in solitary confinement, I get it, solitary confinement is what we have right now as law all across the United States. So, okay, you put them in solitary confinement, but you have to continue with the medication. To not do that is definitely cruel and unusual punishment. They're clinically diagnosed with schizophrenia. If it was anything else, if it was, oh, okay, this person has diabetes, and by the way, he did have diabetes too. Isn't that amazing? They didn't give him medication for that either. But if somebody, he has, I'm trying to think of a good example here. He has the flu, and in order to keep his fever down, he needs to be given, aspirin or painkillers or whatever. If somebody had a real physical ailment, if he was in there with a broken leg and he was in excruciating pain, you have to give him the medication so he's not in excruciating pain. That's not, my point is, that's not open to debate. It's not like, oh, well, this person says we shouldn't give it and this person says we should. No. There's a way you act if you are the institution, if you're a representative of the government and you have these people locked up behind bars serving their sentences. You have to give them their medication. You have to give them, take care of them from a medical perspective. And they didn't do that. And because of that, this guy died. And, I always talk about how I hate how in the U.S. there's so many stories that actually make people come to the defense of people we wouldn't otherwise defend. I mean, before an incident like this, I don't have any sympathy for somebody who's, committed 6 serious crimes in their life, but when there's a reason for it being a serious mental illness, and then you compound the problem by acting in as barbaric and as savage a way as he did, well, then now all of a sudden you make people have to come to the defense of people who we wouldn't otherwise come to the defense of. And this story comes just after a guy baking to death at Rikers in his cell. There was another story of a guy who was beaten to death by prison guards that we covered on the show 2 days ago. And there was another one where a woman had a seizure and was ignored by guards, and she died because they thought she was faking it. This is madness, people. This is madness. Now, understand, I'm a moderate on the issue of criminal justice. In other words, I think sometimes we should just have punishment for some of the most severe crimes. There's no even chance of rehabilitation in some circumstances. That's the page I'm strongly on. In other cases, I think we should do a mix of punishment and rehabilitation. And in other cases, I think you should do just rehabilitation. But I'm definitely a moderate. I believe in the idea of a life in prison without the possibility of parole in some circumstances. The EU doesn't. Their top court ruled, hey, this is cruel and unusual punishment. I disagree. You know, in theory, I like the idea of the death penalty, although I'm not for it in practice because we oftentimes get the wrong people. But I'm a moderate on the issue of criminal justice. But when you look at stuff like this, you think, holy fuck, man. We've become one of the most savage, barbaric, insane nations with our criminal justice system, which looks more like criminal injustice now. In other words, we have criminals to deal with the criminals. So we are becoming the demon that we're trying to avoid. And look, man, I don't want my tax dollars going towards it. I know you don't want your tax dollars going towards it. We got to reform the criminal justice system because this stuff is 100% inexcusable.